Well, every time the Las Vegas Raiders seem to take on the Los Angeles Chargers, it is funky, it is weird, and hey, this week was no exception to that rule. Eddie Paskal hanging out here at the Blue Wire Studios here at the Win. Big shout out to our guys at Blue Wire for hanging out with us and giving us shelter in the storm. Bringing in my guy Jason Fitz, and Fitz, the Raiders fall. What is our final score today? 24-17 to the aforementioned Chargers. And let's start here, Fitz. Can we first off, how you doing by the way? I haven't seen you in a virtual setting in what, a week or two? How are things?
Yeah, they're good. I almost wore the exact same hoodie you did,
It's a
which
good
would have
hoodie.
made us like Batman and Batman. It's a good. Oh yeah, it's
It's a good
comfy.
hoodie.
I mean, the logo's nice on it. I saw you sit down and I thought, wow, we were almost twinsies, which would have been a dynamic. Like we'd be a dynamic wrestling duo, but we'd have to do a lot of like fancy moves because neither of us are big enough to wrestle.
No, no, no. Shout out Raider Image, by the way, for the hoodie one time. Big shout out my guys over there. But Fitz, let's just start, let's go back, I guess, toward a week. So Jimmy G ends the Steelers game in the concussion protocol, goes through the week, ultimately doesn't clear concussion protocol, ruled out yesterday being Saturday. Then we wake up this morning to find out the national guys had broken the news that Aiden O'Connell was starting. I, being the good Raiders employee that I am, did not jump to conclusions. I want to see who the guy is that goes and takes that first snap under center. And it was indeed Aiden O'Connell. But Fitz, when you found out Jimmy G wasn't going to go, and you and I were texting over the weekend, kind of where was your head at when you found out it wasn't going to be Jim G?
Well, I think, it turned into controversy on Twitter or X or whatever we call it now because I posted a little video. I think we got to remember none of this is simple. And what we do as fans is we look at preseason and we say, oh, well, who was better in the preseason means that person's going to be better now. I would remind us all Kenny Pickett looked great in the preseason. Like, they don't game plan in the preseason. There's no sort of, they don't even stunt defensive lines in the preseason. So the ability to read and direct every player I've talked to has said preseason doesn't really matter. So my point was, I think the organization would know from practice who the team is most comfortable with. And you can't wheel somebody out that Devontae and Josh don't feel like is the right answer, that Max doesn't feel like is the right answer, especially given some of the comments that have been made. So all I was saying leading up to it is that I expected the organization to be calculated. I think they were calculated. We find out now that Aiden had taken most of the snaps as a starter over the course of the week. They feel comfortable starting him out there. I think that was the most important thing. It benefits nobody to sort of see what you have if you put a 1-2 team in a bad situation and you put a young quarterback in a bad situation. So got to trust that the entire staff felt like they had the best chance to win and that Aiden O'Connell was comfortable with the depth of the playbook. And frankly, that part of it, it seemed like he really was.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. And I was talking to someone that you and I both know and is much smarter than us this morning in the facility. And we were kind of talking about the Hoyer O'Connell situation. And our pal says, hey, you know what? Like when you look at Brian Hoyer, and he didn't mean this in a negative way, he is a backup quarterback. So you need to keep him in the position of a backup quarterback. And Coach McDaniels essentially said that same thing in his post-game press conference this afternoon. But with the chance to give someone, in this case, the young rookie from Purdue, essentially all the burn during practice, give him a week to game plan to go out there and do his thing. He said, he's the guy that you kind of want to see what you have. And, Coach said, hey, we kept Brian in his same role. We ultimately elevated Aiden to this new role for the week. And all things considered, I think he did okay. There were a lot of moments where he looked like a rookie. Aiden finishes his NFL debut 24 of 39, 238 yards, sacked 7 times. We will get to that in just a second with 1 interception. But I think for me, Fitz, the biggest takeaway from Aiden's day at the office, and we'll get into the nitty gritty of it all and what happened there in the fourth quarter. I think for me, if you're a fan of this team, you have to feel, I don't know if positive is the right word, but you have to feel okay about the adjustments that this kid made, right? I think the first half of Aiden O'Connell today felt and looked, at least from my opinion, very different than the Aiden O'Connell after halftime.
Yeah, well, and look, when I was working for ESPN covering college football, I covered a ton of Aiden O'Connell at Purdue. I'm wildly familiar with this body of work. And when he was drafted, I said, man, this makes a lot of sense. You take a 4th-round flyer on a quarterback, you develop. And worst case scenario is you're developing your next Brian Hoyer, a guy that could be your backup for the next 10 years. Best case scenario, you're developing a future starter. So I think what we saw was in some ways predictable because remember, the last time he played, he was playing for Purdue. Like when you think about the difference in processing information and how quickly you have to get the ball out and how much less time you have to throw the football than you do when you're playing at Purdue, it's staggering. Like Purdue has put up some big numbers and they've had some big receivers with him. And I absolutely loved what he did. But the concept on Aiden O'Connell coming out was that he is a very smart quarterback that will make very smart plays. I think he did that. And in the second half, what we saw was a little bit of acceleration in his processing, which is also part of the norm. Do I think he went in and Wally pipped everything and suddenly became the next Patrick Mahomes out of this game? I think everybody needs to just calm down. I think he had a great first opportunity considering where he was coming from and the leap to the NFL. I thought the leap from first half to second half actually made a lot of sense.
And for me, Fitz, I think that it's easy, right? In hindsight being 2020, Raiders are down 24-7 at halftime. Nothing is working. The offense feels out of sync. The defense can't stop anyone. Khalil Mack is getting rocking and rolling. And you're down big at halftime. And I think that it's an easy position for a rookie making his first career NFL start to say, hey, you know what? Hang my head a little bit. But give him credit, man. He came out there. He led a comeback. Ultimately, it came just a little bit short. But I think that we talk about the intangibles of Aiden O'Connell, obviously the intelligence and the know-how of where the ball needs to be in Josh McDaniel's system. But the fact that this guy showed a little oomph in him, I love it, man. I'm a big fan of what we saw this afternoon in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's the level of calm to everything he executes that's almost frustrating. And again, this matches who he was at Purdue. When the pocket is closing in, he's not freaking out. Like you see a lot of quarterbacks get jittery feet. Aiden O'Connell doesn't. He's sitting there. The problem is at some point he's going to have to get through that faster. At some point you have to realize, hey, I am a liability to my tackles if I hold the ball that long. I don't think the offensive line played well at all. I'm not going to mince words on that. But I also think that their quarterback didn't necessarily always put them in the right situation because, as we've seen, and as was pointed out on the Pittsburgh broadcast several times, when you're going up against J.J. Watt, or when you're going against T.J. Watt, I should say, it's one read and get the ball out, right? Like that was something that in this game, I thought in the first half there needed to be much more of just get the ball out of your hands. He was a little stubborn in his calmness there, but I respect the fact that he never felt rattled no matter how many times he took a hit.
No, and I think that's something that kind of grows and matures just with reps, right? With time on task. Like this is a rookie who was thrown into the fire, essentially says, hey, go get us from where we need to go. And look, was it perfect? Absolutely not. Were there moments that he would want to have back? Absolutely, especially, some in the fourth quarter. But I think to your point, you can't teach that calmness, right? We hear that famous Raiders line all the time. You can't teach speed. You can't teach athleticism, whatever it is. You can't teach a calm, cool demeanor in the pocket when the bullets are flying, when you're under constant duress, when Khalil Mack is going for 6 sacks, one off an NFL record. It's hard to really keep your head, but I really think that's exactly what Aiden did today. To his detriment at times, sure, possibly, but I'd rather have that than a guy who's running around with his, like a chicken with his head cut off.
I think we also need to acknowledge, and this being around the team so much, we sort of forget how limited practices are during the season. So it's not like he found out, okay, you know what, you're going to take all the reps this week. And that meant he got 100 hours on the field with everybody over the course of a week, right? Like you get very little, you mentioned time on task. During the course of the regular season, there's very little actual work on the field that simulates anything close to game action. So I wasn't surprised to see, a couple of throws that were behind Devontae. Because as much as you think you know how to anticipate that speed, you ain't ever played with Devontae Adams before, right? Like there is this moment of I wasn't surprised to see some of the deep balls hang a little bit on him because, frankly, he's got to figure out not only how to anticipate the defense, but how to better anticipate his wide receivers. That's hard to do when you've had a limited number of hours, even during the week, to get ready to the rhythm of what you expect out of your wide receivers at this level. So I think a little bit of grace in that process is also important.
Yeah, and boy, let me tell you what, Fitz, the collective when we saw Devontae go down in the second quarter, I mean, I don't know about you, man, but I was sitting there, I said, oh, come on, like any week but this week, please. We got a rookie quarterback out there. He can't get the run game going. You got to have the best wide receiver in football, at his disposal. Hey, and to credit to Devontae, man, that dude is tough. He came back and he finishes his afternoon, 8 catches, 75 yards, and was the Devontae that we've kind of grown accustomed to seeing.
That's one of the encouraging things, if we're in a situation at all this year where Aiden O'Connell ends up playing multiple games, when you get a young quarterback with most organizations, I constantly yell about this nationally, that if you draft a guy and you think he's your guy, you got to go out and you've got to get him weapons so you can find out right away, is he actually the guy? One of the glorious things about this team, even though it hasn't won a lot of games, is that when you look at the skill positions, the guy's there. So if you're trying to evaluate a young quarterback, you will never find a better opportunity to evaluate a young quarterback than saying, hey, here are the guys you're throwing to. Here's the guy you're handing off to. Like proof of concept. Like I said, I'm not going to forgive the offensive line for having a very bad game. But when you talk about judging a young quarterback, giving him some of the best weapons in the league, which this team has, is an easy way to actually get proof of concept on what that quarterback's capable of.
So let me ask you this, Fitz. I know that we've been kind of, I don't want to say looking at everything in a silver and black tinted glasses, if you will, but like we talk about, Raiders down 17 at the half, and it looked out of sync. It looked disjointed. You and I have talked about the fact that we've seen it for quarters. We've seen it look good for halves. We've seen it look good for series. What is the key to making this look good consistently coming out of the gates? Because we've seen this, early on in the season, right, Fitz? You put up points on that first drive. You put up points on that second drive. And then from there, I don't want to say the wheels kind of fall off, but things don't feel as in rhythm as we would like them to be. And ultimately, that was the case for the Silver and Black this afternoon. Like, what do we need to do to get this going consistently?
Win the line of scrimmage and run the football. Like I just you can't change at this point in the
Mhm.
season. You're not going to change the design of the offense, right? And everybody sits there and says, "Well, what's the coaching staff got?" Like the offense is what the offense is at this point. Like if you ran a restaurant at this point, the menu is the menu. So now you've got the ingredients, you've got the chefs. You got to go out and cook the food. And the problem here is look at the difference. Like the Raiders were persistent this week in trying to run the football, even down 17, persistent in trying to run the football. That turned out to help them dramatically in the fourth quarter because suddenly they started to find better lanes to run the football. And that defense was on the field a lot in the second half of the Chargers. They started to wear down. That's sort of the method to the madness here. I believe that by design, the intent of this offense is to wear you down with long drives. And those long drives are just going to require that you constantly win the line of scrimmage to get 3 or 4 yards a clip. When that doesn't happen, now all of a sudden, like down and distance is more important to this offensive scheme than it is to 99% of them because this is not some version of the run and shoot. This isn't Madden. Like there's a fullback on this roster for a reason. Like the styles makes fights. The styles in this offense is very clearly defined, whether people like it or not. Like there is no question of what this offense is trying to do. The way that this offense can actually win football games is to win the line of scrimmage. You're going to have to find a way to get the running game going like you did in the fourth quarter. In the first quarter, you're going to have to find a way to sustain some of these drives. And that's such I think the defense has been playing well enough to win. I can't be clear enough about that. I think the defense has made enough plays considering the position they've been put in, considering the short field they've been given so often, considering the turnovers that have been given by the offense. I think the defense has done enough, even without the pass rush we expected, to win football games. The offense has got to find a way to stay on the field.
You know what? Interesting note, Fizz. I just looked up as you were talking there. So towards halftime, the Raiders, excuse me, the Chargers had doubled up the Raiders in terms of plays run. The Chargers were at 36, Raiders were at 18, so a true doubling up. I pulled up the final game book here. When all was said and done, the Raiders ran 69 plays to the Chargers 63. So, I mean, we talk about, the formula and when it works, and kind of what Coach McDaniels wants to do. And you and I have talked about this a bunch, right? It's not sexy. It isn't overly flashy. But when the Raiders have been successful with Josh McDaniels at the helm, it has followed a pretty straightforward formula. To your point, control the line of scrimmage, establish a run game, let the quarterback, whether it's Jimmy, Aiden, Brian, whoever it is, let them cook off of that, get your tight ends involved, and just methodically go down the field and put up points. Now, were the Raiders able to do that at times this afternoon? Yeah, but they just haven't been able to do it for a full 60 minutes.
And part of the problem, I won't say problem, part of the complication, that's a fancier word, for that offense is that you have to limit your mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
If you are going to limit possessions, you better get touchdowns when you get the ball. Like how often do we say this? Like you have to get drives to end in touchdowns. And in the second half, the Raiders got deep drives, but the fact that they stalled out and the fact that they had to settle for some field goals, that makes a huge difference in the way this all plays out. Like there is this element for the team that it is meant to have an efficient quarterback that doesn't make mistakes, that can capitalize on the red zone. How many years in a row are we going to talk about red zone deficiency? Red zone turnovers this year are an issue, right? So you end up with a rookie mistake on a throw near the end of the game that was frankly just that. It was a communication error. It was a rookie mistake. He read the defense wrong, never should have been thrown the way it was. And Jacoby wasn't even looking for the football at that point. It was a disaster of a play. Those are going to happen sometimes when you have a rookie quarterback playing his first game. Problem is when those happen, you just don't have a lot of skin left in the game to get it back. So it's unfortunate because this game came down to 2 or 3 plays. And when the Raiders look back at the film, 2 or 3 plays were the difference between win or lose. That only means when you're that close that you've got to make the most of every one of those trips.
Raiders in the red zone this afternoon. Fitz 2 of 5. 2 of 5 in the red zone, right? Hard to
you can't win that way.
You just say it's hard. Yeah,
you can't win that way.
Chargers on the other hand, 3 of 4. So, the Chargers kind of take advantage of their opportunities. The Raiders, unfortunately, aren't able to take care of theirs. Now, I was looking for, I don't want to say I was looking for positives in this game, right? But one thing that as soon as we found out Aiden was going to be the guy, I was like, all right, the one thing that we have to get happening today, one thing that is non-negotiable, you got to get the run game going. And to your point, it happens in the fourth quarter. But I look at the day that Josh Jacobs had. Josh Jacobs finishes with north of 130 total yards. And we saw glimpses, Fitz. We saw glimpses of who he was last year. And I don't want to pat myself on the back or anything and say, oh, I told you so. But I was such a firm believer, and I will remain a steadfast believer in this. It is a matter of time. It was just a matter of time until Josh Jacobs got rocking and rolling. And yeah, we look at the total rushing yards today, 58 yards at just about 3.5 yards per carry. But again, having him active in the passing game, it shows you what kind of dynamic playmaker and how important he is for this offense, especially when you got a rookie quarterback under center.
Yeah, absolutely. And go back to what you said earlier about the first half. When you only have 15 plays, how the hell do you expect to get the running game going?
You can't.
Really, you can't. And if if part of the appeal of the running game, and this is something that Staley and McVay and other offensive minds have really stressed, is that you just have to run the football, even if you're not successful, because as the game wears down, you can have opportunity to get more yards. And we saw that in the fourth quarter. But when you only run 15 plays, this comes back to the answer of how do they create this for 4 quarters? If 1st and 10 is a 1 yard run and 2nd and 9 is a 3 yard run, now all of a sudden you're in 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7. You can't run your way through 3rd and 7. So now you're predictable to the defense. Everybody knows what you're trying to do. You've got to get to the point where you are picking up 5 or 6 yards on that first run, which opens up everything. And that's what happened in the second half. How do you do that? Man, you've got to, at some point, you've got to find a way to push the line forward. And the number of times we've seen in the first half of games, particularly Josh Jacobs get hit immediately. I mean, I said this on Raider Nation Radio this week. We watched Jimmy G last week get sacked on a handoff. How does that happen, right? So you've got to get to the point where your running back at least has the time to see what's in front of him. And that in the first half wasn't happening yet again. So that's the complication because, as much as Josh is a weapon, if everybody's shutting it down, you have got to find a way to get it going. And that, whether that's cute run design, I thought the jet sweep to Josh was a really nice call. I thought that sort of play calling was hey, at least I'm giving my running back an opportunity to run out of a different formation and maybe catch the defense by surprise. I want to see more of that. I want to see more creativity to try and get Jacobs going.
And I don't want to pile on the offensive line. I really don't. But when you give up 7 sacks and 6 of them are to one guy, and that one guy was moving all along the offensive, right? It wasn't just like he was going at Colton. He wasn't just going at Jermaine on the right side. Khalil was moving all around that defensive front. And, as simple as it sounds, Fitz, you can't have that happen. You can't have that. It doesn't seem like that long ago that we saw Khalil Mack do that very thing we saw today to Michael Schofield in Denver and really kind of just embarrass the man for the better part of 60 minutes. But my goodness, I mean, how do you kind of clean that up? How do you make it so one guy doesn't game wreck you?
Yeah, communication. That's the thing that offensive linemen will tell me, and I've learned this from a couple of the guys that I've worked with before that are offensive linemen. Passing off rushers is the most important thing that offensive linemen do. And the one play where Khalil started on the outside and then came to the inside, nobody even really touched him, and then Matt comes right up the middle there. Well, that's one of those things where you had 2 guys blocking somebody not named Khalil Mack and Khalil Mack coming free. How does that happen? That happens because 2 guys just aren't communicating well. So there doesn't seem to be the same understanding. And, we talk all the time, you and I have, about the complication of Josh McDaniels' offense and how the wide receiver and the quarterback have to see it the same. Well, offensive linemen, part of the reason that you want 5 guys to play together all the time is because you really have to get to the point where it's 5 guys that know exactly who's going to do what, where, depending on what the defense is giving them. That's not happening. And, part of that, obviously we focus on the tackles because we see the tackles. I will argue till I'm dead that part of that is on the interior portion of the line too. You've got to communicate who's picking up what. Josh Jacobs was a godsend on a couple of plays where he saved somebody that was coming through. And I got to give Josh a ton of credit. That's part of the reason he's in there, because we don't know if Zamir White can pick up those sorts of blocks. That's part of the reason Josh is valuable. But, man, I watched that offensive line, and I just thought communication is the thing that's lacking.
And I don't want to say it's funny, but it's interesting because I was talking to Lincoln Kennedy, our mutual friend, last week about that very thing. And it was exactly what he was saying. He said the level of communication has to be better. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts, and hey, we have time to kind of work this out. He said, if you want to, not wholesale fix an offensive line because there's so much that goes into it. He goes, but step one is you got to talk. You have to talk. And he said you have to have someone on that line who's going to hold the other four guys and really that entire room accountable for not only communicating, but for doing the right thing day after day, play after play, practice session after practice session. And he says that's where it all has to begin. It has to begin with communication. Like many things in life, Fitz, you just got to talk.
Well, and the funny part about that is, let's be honest, if this was happening a year ago, I don't think a lot of us would have been surprised. The concept coming into last season was that offensive line was going to be weakness. The offensive line instead played way better than anybody expected. So I think what we did as a general whole is we took that as a sign that this year they're going to run it back. Only one difference on that roster. It's going to be just fine. It's not fine. So whether it's taken a step back, whether teams have figured out how to attack the guys better, whether last year was just one of those magical, I can't believe that happened years, I don't know. But realistically, as they referenced on the broadcast for anybody who was watching, nobody uses 6 offensive linemen more than the Raiders. You're not doing that because you want to do that. You're doing that because you have to do that. Let's be really clear on that. If a team can get by with just 5 offensive linemen and they can suddenly give you more weapons to throw the ball to, if a team cannot keep somebody in the pocket to help, they want more people out there to create some sort of a mismatch. I don't think the staff in general feels comfortable allowing that to happen because they understand they need the 6th person. They need jumbo packages. They need as many tight ends in as possible. They're just trying to keep guys upright right now, which is surprising this year. And if that doesn't get fixed, that will be the defining portion of this. As much as we want to obsess about Jimmy G and Aiden O'Connell, I'm telling you, I don't care who's quarterback. I don't care if you brought back Rich Gannon in his prime and you put Rich Gannon behind that line. If the line doesn't play better, the team's not going to win.
We kind of find ourselves, Fitz, now at the, let's call it the quarter mark of the NFL season. Thanks to the 17th game, we don't really have a true quarter mark. But, I think the biggest frustration for me is when we look at the Raiders sitting here now at 1-3, having lost 3 games in a row. I think what's hard for me as not only like a dude who gets paid miraculously to talk about this team, but also as like a fan, right? Like if I were to say, Fitz, the issue through 4 games for the Raiders is X, I have a hard time narrowing it down to one issue because when you were talking earlier, you said, I think the defense has done enough to have the Raiders win games. I will admit, part of me kind of rolled my eyes. I wasn't on camera. I made sure I wasn't, but kind of, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit. But I go back and I look at the stats from today. You hold Herbert to 167 yards. Yes, the Chargers, they ran for, what's the number here, 155. But damn near 70 of those yards were on the opening drive. So you take that opening drive out, you hold the Chargers to, let's call it 85 rushing yards. Herbert gets held to 167. You're right. The defense did enough. As crazy as it sounds, the defense did enough today for the Raiders to win this game. Have they done that consistently? No. Some weeks the offense, some weeks the defense, some weeks the offensive line. I'm going around and around to get to this point, Fitz. If you were to narrow it down to one thing why the Raiders sit here at 1-3, losers of 3 in a row, what is that reason?
Oh, this is a harsh answer.
You got look, one. Okay.
I'm gonna be harsh, and I think it's a team-wide lack of attention to detail. And I'm just like, I know that sounds harsh.
I think that sounds fair, though.
We've had people.
That's fair. That's not a cheap shot,
No, we've had people, on X comment the other day that was like, oh, well, you guys are paid by the team. I'm not. So, I'm just going to be honest. The mental mistakes at different times by different people is the most maddening thing. And that's the sign of a team that needs to get better because like Tillery's mistake was absolutely inexcusable. And there's no 2 ways about it. Like when you have Marcus Peters and Max Crosby going up to Herbert to apologize for a teammate, essentially. And that's like, make no bones about it. Like they're going up and saying like, that shouldn't happen. Like, right. I mean, they're trying to smooth things over. That was such a huge mistake. When you think about some of the penalties we saw at bad times, huge mistake. When you think about some of the offensive line issues, huge mistakes. Like the easy answer would be, well, we need one thing and it will fix everything. I wish it was that situation, but let's look at this season. You beat a terrible Broncos team. You beat a Broncos team that is so bad that I think they might end up in contention for the first overall pick. And there's a chance the Raiders will be facing Herbert, Mahomes, and Caleb Williams for the next 15 years. Like, think about that. Like, that's how bad I think the Broncos are. You beat that team. You got absolutely crushed by a great Bills team. There's no shame in that. They're going to crush everybody. Look at what they did to Miami. So that's fine. You let a putrid Steelers offense beat you, and now you lost a winnable game to the Chargers. in my mind, the frustrating part about this is that the pieces are there. The talent, as you and I have talked about since the summer, there's too much talent for this team to be dreadful. Like there just is. The stars are playing like stars. The rest of the team right now needs to just play like lunch pail rest of the team. Like everybody just do your damn job. Everybody involved in this process needs to focus on I'm not going to do too much. I'm not going to try and be a superhero. I'm not going to lose my you know what at any point. I'm just going to do exactly my job. And I honestly think like you look at the upcoming schedule, the Packers. The Packers are up and down. The Patriots are abysmal. I think they're a bad football team. You got the Bears after that, who are one of the two worst teams in the league. Like there are 3 wins ahead of this team if they can clean up these things. But that if is something we've said every week so far this season. You can't clean that up unless there's a better discipline and attention to detail from 1 to 53, from 1 to everybody on the practice squad.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I was texting someone during the game, and granted, I was kind of proven wrong about this, but after the Tillery hit, which I mean, you're 100% correct. There's no need for it. It's a bad hit. It's a late hit. I tweeted out or X'd out or posted whatever it is these days that Max's reaction to that tells you everything you need to know. The immediate frustration, the immediate grabbing of the grabbing of the helmet, the fact that to your point where he goes over to Herbert and says, "Hey, like we can't do that. Like that's not cool. Competitor to competitor, man to man. Like that's not what we're about." Tells you everything you need to know about that instance. But after a few minutes after that, I was texting with someone. I said, it really does feel like in that moment, right? Because the Chargers sideline is erupts. They're galvanized by the fact that Tillery had kind of done their guy dirty. Everyone's loud, cheering and shouting and pushing and doing the whole deal. I said, it really has at moments for yesterday or today, I should say, felt like it was Max Crosby and 21 dudes, right? Now, I think you got to give the Raiders a ton of credit for kind of, getting it together at the halftime. Aiden O'Connell, those guys really coming back, having pride in what they do, getting so close to ultimately having a pretty exciting comeback there. But man, like, who is going to be the guy along with Matt? We talked about it, last week or 2 weeks ago, Fitz? Who's going to be Robin? You have your Batman. You have Max Crosby. You know what he's going to bring every single week. You know what Devontae is going to do every single week, even when he misses a portion of the game, having to go and get checked out. You know what these guys are going to do. But who is going to, and I mean this in the best possible way, who is going to be their sidekick? Who is going to provide that ancillary support? And unfortunately, through 4 weeks, it really hasn't felt like we found those guys.
No, those guys haven't been there. I mean, I think there have been flashes of nice play over the course of the first few weeks. Obviously, missing Nate Hobbs today was a big deal. I think he's had flashes. I think Jacorian Bennett's had some flashes also. He's had some good plays. He's also had some rookie moments, right? Like there are some guys that are trying to. Divine Diablo's had some flashes too. But also go back to that first drive. You mentioned all the rushing yards that were given up. The number of times that they had Chargers wrapped up defensively, and the guy either fell forward for an extra 4 yards or broke through those tackles. Like the funny thing is, it felt like this team needed a wake-up call in the second half and then started to play better. I guess my question is, why do you need a wake-up call when you're 1-2 and you're playing one of your biggest rivals and you know what's on the line and you're playing with your backup quarterback? How often do we hear every single person say, man, it's next man up? Everybody's just got to focus on next man up. Well, okay, then why do you need a wake-up call in this game? And you're right, like, I'm still waiting for that explosive juggernaut. We've had a few plays here and there from different guys in the interior of the defensive line, but is there anybody yet that we just look at and say, oh my gosh, that's the guy? Like, I feel like the only time I heard Tyree Wilson's name today was when there was an illegal hands to the face and it was a 5-yard penalty on a huge max play. So like, it's frustrating because there are guys trying to develop into being that guy, but there's no time for this team to do that. So you got to hyper speed this somehow and get other contributors out there. Cause my God, like this is another year. It's only a quarter of the way through, but it's hard not to feel like another year of absolute greatness isn't being wasted for Max.
And speaking of Max, we look at his line this afternoon, Fitz. 8 total tackles, leads the team. 2 sacks. He had a third, one of which was taken away. 2 quarterback hits, 2 tackles for loss. The man's everywhere, right? Absolutely everywhere. Now, riddle me this, and I don't want to set you up here, Fitz. Guess how many other people on the Raiders had more than 1 tackle for loss today?
Oh God, 1 maybe?
3. We had 3.
2. Okay.
Yeah, so we had
Okay.
three.
I
One,
was guessing low. I was guessing low.
yeah, one from Butler, one from Meek Robertson, and then one from Kuntz. I think Kuntz actually low key had a nice. We talk about a support role, an ancillary role. I think Malcolm actually had a nice day at the office. But I mean, it is crazy though. Where
He did.
I'm looking at the game book, right, and you look at the defensive line, or excuse me, the defensive overall stats, and Max's line is absurd. It looks like a like an account, like a book of accounting or something like that. And then after that, it's just the drop off is crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. And to your point, right? Max is playing out of his mind. Max is doing his thing. But come on, the guy needs a little bit of help. He needs something from this group. And Tyree Wilson finishes the afternoon with one total tackle. And look, I know that there's a lot going on. Excuse me, a lot going on along that defensive line the past couple of weeks. But man, you got to get some help for number 98. You just got to find a way to do it.
Yeah, and particularly knowing that Wilson and Kuntz are two people that were supposed to have like ancillary roles and really come in and be a different sort of guy, they're gonna have to grow up quickly. Both of them.
Hmm.
Like I think Kuntz he's got to turn into the other guy. Like there are so many advantages to playing opposite of Max Crosby wherever Max is playing in the way you're going to be defended. Somebody's got to start taking advantage of those matchups, and it's unfortunate. It's difficult right now because as you mentioned, it's obviously a very complicated time on that defensive line, and nobody thought we would be sitting here, but we are. So now what are you going to do about it? It's not like you can just go out and get a great edge rusher on the open market at this point. It's not like there's a guy that's going to be available for trade. It's not like you can even fit in the salary cap to go get some epic guy if you wanted to. So, like, there's no easy solution. You've got to find a way as a defense to either scheme more pressure and find it, or you've got to find a way as a defense to coach the guys up to create more pressure. The problem is, as we've talked about before, if you want to scheme up more pressure and send more blitzes, then now you are going to put a secondary that so far has, been they've had some moments and they've had some moments. You're going to make that secondary very vulnerable if you start sending all that help up to create more pressure. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But at some point, when you're taking on great quarterbacks, you've got to find a way to make that quarterback adjust.
Just a funny moment here as Fitz as we record at Blue Wire. One that I feel like kind of encapsulates where we were today. Had a Raiders fan. So Blue Wire has these fantastic kind of floor to ceiling windows here, and we had a Raiders fan just walk by, and if you can see on the video here, we have our logo and everything up. And he just walks by. He catches my eye and he hits me with one of these, Fitz. Just the shrug and the head shake. The shrug and the head shake. So I feel you, brother. Like, I'm with you. Like, you and I know what these people are feeling right now. I understand the angst from this fan base. Oh, he gave me a thumbs up. He just walked by. So maybe he's feeling a little bit better. But all the same, man, gosh, at the quarter point of the season now, you got to figure it out. Now you got 8 days. You got, you go on Monday Night Football now. You have that extra day to get healthy, to get ready for a Packers team that a Packers team that has had good moments and not so good moments this year. But man, I think you and I both, I don't want to say forget, but it kind of sneaks up on you how quickly this season goes.
This is the most important part of the schedule, and I've got it up in front of me again. When you have
Got to.
Packers, Patriots, Bears, you got the Lions, who are obviously very difficult, the Giants, who don't look good, and the Jets, who suddenly don't look good. That's a meat of the schedule where you've got to win the majority of those games. Because after that, you got the Dolphins, Chiefs, Vikings, Chargers, Chiefs, right? Like that's going to be a gauntlet, right? So this becomes the time where not only are the Raiders going to have to make up, they're going to have to bank all at once. It's like that weakest link game where you're just going to have to say bank, bank, bank. Going to have to find some way to bank some wins. You're going to have to find some way to fix both lines. And the unfortunate thing is that this isn't Madden. And right now, if you talk about skill positions, players, and you talk about sacks, boy, it feels like we're playing Madden. But as we've talked about a billion times, and every fat guy always tells us, football's won in the trenches. And right now, the Raiders are not winning in the trenches on either side of the ball. What do you do when you're not winning on the trenches on either side of the ball?
Yeah, we come out of Sunday's game, Fits, with more questions than answers, unfortunately. But such is life when you're sitting at 1-3, and for lack of a better term, just trying to figure out a way to make it work, to get all the pieces together. Because, let's be very clear, the pieces are all there. There is not a lack of talent on this 53-man roster. I talked about it all offseason. You and I have had this conversation both on and off the air. Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels have done a fantastic job in turning over this roster, in making this a more complete roster from 1 to 53. So now it's a matter of, to your point, take the pieces, take the ingredients you got at the restaurant, and we have to start making some better meals. But Fitz, give the people some clues of where they can find you with your new very exciting gig.
No, thanks. Well, you can obviously follow me on all the social medias at Jason Fitz. And check out Yahoo Sports, a great app. And I'm really proud of the content we're doing out there. I'm doing college football quick hit videos all the time. And they're doing a bunch of NFL content out there, a bunch of shows, fantasy football, NFL, all of it. So if you haven't checked out the Yahoo Sports app, be sure to do it. And then hang out with me on Fox Sports Radio on Saturday mornings with the fellas from 5 to 9 a.m. Eastern while you're still in bed. You're sleeping, Eddie's sleeping, I'm up working. That's the way that works.
I usually give you 30 seconds of plugs, Fitz, but I don't even know if you needed 30. I think we were in at about 19, 20. That was succinct.
I'm professional. But one thing I'm damn sure of is that I'm repping Raider Nation on all of these shows. So I will live the angst that we're all feeling on all of my shows like the very, very, very slim professional I am.
But the beauty of it is, Fitz, right? We're going to do it all again on Monday night. Cannot wait. Allegiant Stadium is going to be jumping. It's going to be a lot of fun to get the NFL eyes on that beautiful stadium right off the strip again. I cannot wait. And you know what? Similar to last week, right? We're going to come in tomorrow. We're going to lick our wounds. We're going to figure out what needs to get better going forward. Players' Day off Tuesday. And then come Wednesday, all eyes are on the Packers. And here we go. Let's do it all again. So, for Eddie Paskal, my guest and dear friend Jason Fitz, everyone at Silver and Black Productions, thank you for hanging out with us. On the way out, big shout out to our guys at Blue Wire, who, as I said, have given us shelter in the storm, and we appreciate them immensely. Enjoy the week, Raider Nation, and we will see you guys next week on Monday night for the fifth quarter, presented by Twitch.